Hi, my name is Andy Schmuckler. I call myself a man on a mission. The topic I've planned on leading off with today has got to do with abortion, and in particular, how to understand it in the context of our larger political battle here in America at this moment in our history. Well, it's more than a moment. It's practically a generation, actually, that I've been looking at the rising force that's been taking over a once respectable political party. And I'll get to that in just a few minutes, but let me just start off, as I often do, giving some idea of what the mission is that I'm on, which is that I've got a way of understanding the story of our species that, for one thing, illuminates the crisis in America today, that I think holds water and needs to get out there because I think it puts some important things in very different light, including understanding what kind of creatures we are and why our history looks the way it looks and what are the nature of the challenges we have to face. I think that there's something well, important enough that I'm giving it everything I got, which I've been doing for quite a while, actually. That book came out in 1984. It's called The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power in Social Evolution. And that's one of the foundations of this better human story that I'm trying to get out there. And the problem in America today is a manifestation of a larger thing that I think I can illuminate. And that could have a beneficial impact on our ability to win the battles that we need to win. The battle to preserve American democracy here in the short term, and the battle to get our human civilization on this planet to develop into the kind of well-ordered system it needs to be if we're going to survive on this planet for the long haul rather than destroy ourselves. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. And I always start off talking about the something more concrete because I recognize that the claims that I'm making might sound grandiose and implausible, or implausible and therefore grandiose, that I got no right to say that this could have a beneficial impact. And so I try to establish my credibility by talking about things that are much more easily brought into focus because they're about some immediate things that we're already thinking about. And in that context, let me, before I get to abortion and how that fits into our current political crisis, let me follow up on something I did yesterday in a sort of a special edition of this live streaming thing that I'm doing, which was about the situation between Israel and Iran. And a lot of other things in that picture too, but Israel and Iran is the heart of it. I have thought it interesting that that people have not paid very much attention to what I think is an inescapable conclusion, which is that the Israelis turned out to, at least at this point in time, to be interested in getting the wider regional war that I had assumed from the outset that they wanted to avoid. And I just look at what they did in attacking that embassy of Iran in Damascus. And there's no way you can think about that without recognizing that it constitutes a provocation, an escalation, that it compelled basically the Iranians to do something retaliatory. That's just the way it is among nations. People have a real "don't tread on me." And by the way, that is a function of the social evolutionary situation that we plunged into. That there is no order among the entities, civilized societies interacting with each other. So in that context, if somebody does something to you that's a unacceptable blow, like bomb your embassy, which is legally the territory of your country, there's almost a mandatory sense in which people have to respond. By people, I mean the nation has to respond, and a nation like Iran, that's trying to be the dominant power in the region, can't look weak, and also you can't look weak to your people. We saw that after 9/11. We had a need to strike back. So anyway, what the Israelis did clearly represented an escalation. And since everybody in the world seemed to say, well, the Iranians are going to have to do something, that proves that it was making more likely a regional war. And the question was, well, how, not whether, but how would the Iranians respond? One interesting thing I want to report as a follow-up on what I talked about then is that I posted that video on Daily Costs, where I'm a regular contributor, usually in writing, but increasingly with videos. And there was a discussion. A lot of people disagreed with my interpretation of what the Iranians did in response. I went from what like General McCaffrey was saying, this is a disproportionate response, as indicating that the Iranians were were upping the ante in return, that they were not trying to diffuse the situation. But a lot of people, and I don't know that they're wrong, thought that I was mistaken, that they presumably knew that none of that stuff was going to land in Israel, or almost none, and do much damage, that they gave a lot of notice. And other people then say, well, no, they didn't know any such thing. I think Thomas Friedman in the New York Times says they didn't know any such thing. They're probably surprised that the defenses that Israel had, they caught with the help of the Americans and the Jordanians a bit, 99% of what the Iranians threw at them. So I don't know. I interpreted the Iranian response as meaning Okay, you want a regional war? Let's go. And here we are on the ladder, and we're going to take you up to the next rung. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But going back to the original notion that first of all, that it's clear that when the Israelis decided to hit this, I mean, of course they had some desirable targets, but they're small potatoes compared to the question: are we going to get into a new kind of struggle, not through proxies, but them sending us things, maybe us bombing them, a real war rather than what's been simmering for 30 years or maybe 50 between Iran and Israel since the Ayatollah took over. They had to know, and it was interesting after the Iranians retaliated. First of all, people still aren't talking about, well, why did the Israelis do that? And second, they focused on Iran as the problem, an outrage that they should have attacked. Well, what about how it started? Well, so I have a bit of an interpretation that I don't know how much this is conscious and how much this is unconscious. But the fact is that people are not talking about what the Israelis clearly chose. On the other hand, they're focusing on Iran. And I think that the reason for that, in a sense, it makes good policy sense. Though I, as devoted to the truth as I am, don't really like fudging some important part of the picture, which is the Israelis' responsibility. The thing is, I'm guessing, that regardless of how much people are unhappy with this Netanyahu semi-fascist regime in Israel and the choices that they've been making, not just here, but before that, all that they've been doing in Gaza. And before that, their attempt to overthrow Israeli democracy by eliminating the independence of the judiciary. All that's still there. All that's important. But Iran is the more important problem for a lot of the world's actors. In the bigger picture, a fascistic regime in Israel is not trivial, but Iran has been, for a long time, a seriously destabilizing, disorder-creating force. I mean, it's created Hezbollah, it's created Hamas. I don't mean, out of nothing, but as extensions of their power. And it's created the Houthis, and it's threatened Saudi Arabia, which is still a place where we get a lot of oil, or the world gets a lot of oil. There's a lot, and it's aligned itself with Putin and Russia, and helping Putin survive a terrible blunder. And Putin's another one of those really big issues in the world, a source of a lot of destructiveness. So I think either consciously or unconsciously, the people I've been watching discussing this situation, journalists, former generals, intelligence officers, diplomats who focus on Iran, that the world is either consciously or unconsciously sort of putting the Israelis off to the side and saying, well, we got a deal here with Iran because that's the bigger threat to world peace. Okay. It remains to be seen. It looks like Biden has said to Israel, don't retaliate. It seems clear that the Israelis are going to retaliate, and we'll get an idea from the nature of that retaliation, whether it's further escalation, which I can picture, or if it's at a level that can become again part of the simmering regional war that we've had. So I don't know whether the pressures that have been brought on to Israel, but they didn't start this thing, I don't think, with the idea that they were going to just go back to the slow boil regional war. And if they do that, it's going to be because various things have changed their mind. That hasn't happened yet. I mean, Biden has been conspicuously ineffective at getting this Israeli regime to do what he thinks is in the interests, certainly of the United States, but even of Israel and of the wider region. So I don't know if that's going to start here and now. I'd like to be hopeful. Okay, enough. So let's pull back away from that geopolitical arena in which the forces of disorder and lawlessness, you might say, are battling with the forces of trying to create a better order. I mean, like what? Look at what Putin did to the order of Europe with his move. I think Biden's greatest achievement in world politics is the way he was able to put the forces of order together, even after Trump had alienated so many of our enemies. They're eager for American leadership. He provided good American leadership, and we were well on our way to making Putin fail. I mean, he's already failed. It's already been a disaster for him. But the House of Representatives, under the faction that's dominating it currently, has thrown him a life raft. I read a little headline, I think, on Huffington Post this morning about that Speaker Johnson's going to bring something about aid to Israel and aid to Ukraine onto the floor. Both of those would pass with huge margins, by the way. But the pro-Putin wing has controlled the House. And you can see that Mike Johnson has also been, in many ways, aligned with, you might call, the force of fascism that's arisen in the American political arena and transformed conservative America from what we had known, if you grow up as a baby boomer with Eisenhower and others, all the way up through the first Bush. You got a sense of the Republican Party as one that's basically a normal American party with its faults but its commitment to playing more or less by the rules. I mean, you could say that the Republican Party had shown some signs of breakdown when you got Watergate with a Republican president. And then when you get Ronald Reagan, you get the Iran-Contra with a Republican president. There's an aspect of lawlessness that's already creeping up. But, Nixon got on the helicopter because he basically respected that he had to, he couldn't just make war on the rules. So here we are. And I hope that the forces of good order, which have to do with, for example, democracy, which is, if the majority want to pass these things, why are we letting this pro-Putin minority in the House starve the Ukrainians of armaments that are, because of which they're having to retreat and have more of their people killed, and hard-won territory getting surrendered back to Putin's forces? Well, it gives you an idea that we're dealing with something that's can be seen in some kind of big picture. It's got something to do with fascism. It's got something to do with lawlessness, which is related. It's got something to do with siding with America's enemies and against, our allies are waiting for us to pass those, whatever it is, $63 billion and get the pipeline moving again. It's upsetting to the Europeans. It's very upsetting to our traditional friends that this force of fascism owns a piece of the American power system that's sufficient to call into question one of the greatest achievements of NATO in its history, our ability to organize. And okay, well, let's get back. Let's get to abortion. It's all part of the same picture. Well, I use the word fascism to incorporate a large pattern of things. And the abortion issue is related to what I might call the Grand Inquisitor or the Inquisition version of or component of fascism. Not every fascist element has the same components, but you look at Putin and his regime. They make war on LGBT and trans. Somehow there's an affinity there. But let's get to abortion again. It's been argued that abortion issue is for Biden in 2024, essentially like what the gay marriage issue was for Bush in 2004. Well, and there's a way you can articulate what they have in common, and it's not trivial. In each case, one side of the presidential battle campaign chooses a cultural issue, a hot button moral issue or something on which the majority of the American people back in 2004, and in this case now, are against the other side. So Bush with Rove's direction in 2004, ran a campaign based on against gay rights. The polls about gay rights, about Americans' feelings, were like 60 couple percent were against gay marriage and other such things. And the Democratic Party found itself increasingly on the side of advancing those causes. It may well be that the election of 2004 was decided by that difference between the 60% that believed in gay marriage or whatever, and the 50% plus one you got, or the electoral college. That worked for Bush. It looks like maybe he won because of that issue. And likewise, in 2024, Joe Biden is looking at an abortion issue where the great majority of Americans are against what the Republicans have done and are doing with the issue. Even more than that 60 couple, I think it's in the upper 60s or something, that are fundamentally against it. And the Republicans keep doubling down. So it looks like a real winner of an issue. We can even see that, the elections that have been held in red states like Kansas and Ohio, but especially Kansas, when people get a chance to vote on that issue, even a lot of Republicans don't like what their party is doing on the issue of abortion. So it's similarly a wedge issue. But there's also a difference between the two, which I want to point out. In both cases, gay marriage forbidden or blocked or prohibited, whatever the word would be, according to the Bush campaign. And then what the bans on abortion in these couple years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. In both cases, what the Republicans stand for is the imposition on society of a certain set of moral judgments. No gay marriage. The Bible says this or whatever that, and marriage is between a man and a woman. This is how we see it, and this is how the country's going to be run. And nowadays, the moral vision of there's a person there as soon as the egg gets fertilized. It has all the rights of a human being. That's how we see it. And that's how it's going to be done throughout the country. Which brings me to how I think it's best to conceive the abortion issue. Now, I am in favor of the state not involving itself in the abortion issue, and I want to explain why. And it isn't necessarily the kind of reasoning that went into Roe v. Wade. I didn't want it to be overturned, but I was never all that excited about that way of establishing that the state will stay out of the issue. I think that the right way to establish that constitutionally is to look at the First Amendment. You don't have to find umbras and penumbras of a right to privacy. It says freedom of religion. And it says there will not be any establishment of religion. That second one is important too. One of them says about liberty, and the non-establishment says no group of people with a particular religious point of view will impose their point of view on everybody else, if that can be possibly avoided. I mean, we don't allow human sacrifice, for example. I don't have any problem with that. If people's religion, they have the Aztec religion or something like that, and they want to take some lovely young virgin from the tribe and sacrifice her on the altar. I don't mind. I don't mind establishing religion to the extent that that's not allowed. But with abortion, there are a couple things to be said. You could start with a lot of the things about having to do with the prohibition of abortion are based on beliefs that are held within the context of religious system of understanding. And they are religious beliefs to a large extent. I am not interested in taking an issue about, is it okay to kill a fetus at a certain stage or an embryo or whatever. I don't think we need to go to that point where people have different religious beliefs. The question is, how are we going to deal with the fact that different people see it differently? And in the case of abortion, between the time that they handed down Roe v. Wade, which was, I think, 1973, and the time that it was overturned in Dobbs in 2022, we had an enormous national discussion about the rights and wrongs of abortion. And it wasn't like human sacrifice, where, I mean, some of these things, you kind of hate to have numbers matter. But if it's 99-1 on an issue like human sacrifice or something like that, well, with abortion, it was more or less 50-50 with some fluctuations. And now you can see that once you overturn that right and people take a look at what happens, the great majority of the American people do not agree with what Alito did with his Supreme Court decision. And if you've spent 50 years having a national discussion and you remain very divided, and maybe so divided that the moralistic impose our views on the society point of view is a minority view. I mean, it's bad enough to even allow us some kind of majority to impose its ways. That has been a recipe for a lot of persecution and bad stuff. Like how the Jews were treated for 1,000 years in Europe as a minority religion. Even being a majority shouldn't allow you to impose your religion on other people. But when you're a minority, it takes some kind of a spirit to be willing to impose, say, we're going to make all of you live according to what we believe. I mean, we have had a choice in America on the issue of abortion. And it's not a completely happy choice, but there are just two options. One is the Alito option, the Grand Inquisitor option. I'll get back to that because it wasn't just, there was a spirit visible, which means that some Americans, in this case, apparently a minority, will compel everybody to conduct their lives in accordance with the smaller group's religious beliefs. Or we can say, when it comes to things like this, we Americans can disagree strenuously, but our agreement really is that everybody's going to be able to live in accordance with their own religious beliefs, their own deepest beliefs about what's true and what's sacred and what isn't sacred. And abortion is an issue which fits that latter one rather well. It's not, people analogized, I don't know, 20 years in the Atlantic or something, an essay saying that the abortion issue is like the slavery issue. But in a fundamental way, it's not, because the abortion issue is something which gets played out in little microcosms of families and couples and whatever. It's not a public drama, and it doesn't have public ramifications. Everybody, I mean, here privacy does come out, that it doesn't affect the larger society in a way that the institution of slavery affected the wider society. Oh, do we give these people 3/5 more votes? Oh, do we compel these poor whites to compete against slave labor? There were all kinds of ramifications to slavery that made it not just, a private matter that people can live according to their own values. Yeah, a lot of people in the South believe that the Bible justified slavery because there was slavery in the Bible. Okay, they can believe that. But the issue of whether we were going to be half slave and half free, well, Abraham Lincoln said a house divided against itself cannot stand. That's because of all the ramifications of the thing. But with abortion, if you just say, and I say this is the American way, what we say, okay, people, we're all living in this society together. And the important thing here is that on a religious issue, we let everybody follow their own conscience. This is liberty. This is democracy. That we have a non-establishment clause that keeps people from imposing on other people their religious beliefs. People have been talking about abortion as a liberty issue or a freedom issue. And that is valid, but I think it can be brought into more powerful focus to conjure up what the fascistic aspect is of what's going on, which is we've got a minority that thinks it's entitled to impose its set of values on everybody, when we've got the option of letting everybody do what they believe in. People who are unhappy to live in a world where other people are doing things which they don't approve of, well, we have to deal with that a lot. I mean, a lot of people have religious beliefs that other people think are going to send them to hell. We don't, not everybody approves of everybody, but we have to live in a world, and that's what part of the democracy is. We tolerate what can be tolerated. If the society doesn't have an overwhelming interest in making sure that people don't steal and don't kill okay, well, we have, if there's some religious group that believes in murder, we aren't going to tolerate that, or slavery. We got to come to some resolution on some things, but we don't have to come to a resolution on others. We let everybody live according to their own God-given voice, as it might be put. It's part of the vision of the founders that we would not give the state the power to constrain people in the living of their lives in ways that are not necessary. And with abortion, it's not necessary. So I have written in my op-eds to the Trump country that I live in. I mean, it's Trump country now, but it's also been in my mind, a beautiful conservative rural area in which I ran for Congress. And there's a lot that's really fine here. And I put out messages to them every week as op-eds in a couple of newspapers where I ran for Congress. And I put out to them, we have a choice as a nation. One group, in fact, a minority, imposes its views on everybody, or everybody gets to live in accordance with using their freedom of religion. I don't know that I ever change anybody's minds, but I would like for people to look at things that way, because I really am not interested in prejudging whether they're right about it's already sacred as soon as fertilization takes place, or implantation, or whatever. I think fertilization's the line. I don't want to take a position on that, because what do I know? But I do know something about what the American way has been on the subject of religion. And the American way has been, we let people find their own paths. That was a major breakthrough. They had seen what happened in Europe in the religious wars between Protestantism and Catholicism all over Europe, when Christendom broke down into different religions. A lot of persecution, a lot of warfare. It has a lot of things that are ugly that result from people's believing we can't just let everybody live their own lives their way, wherever possible, which includes abortion. And then we take a look at the opinion that was handed down by Alito in that Dobbs thing, where Roe v. Wade got overturned. I remember that got leaked. It was sort of a big deal that it got leaked before it was an official decision. But it was basically the decision that got handed down. And there's a lot in that decision which shows a significant component of the spirit of fascism. I called it the Grand Inquisitor, or the Inquisition version. I mean, there's such a righteous, he's got God's truth, Alito does, and he's got nothing but contempt for people who see things differently. And he doesn't feel like there's anything wrong with his using the tools of the Inquisition to go after the enemies of the righteous way. I could imagine Roe v. Wade being overturned by a different kind of a decision. I would still think it was a mistake, because there's no reason to be establishing religion here on everybody. But I think Alito shows something more. I've talked about how, I hope if you go to my YouTube link to a library of my, and you look up to find something about America's serious crisis about the Supreme Court. And I'm a lover of the Supreme Court. I mean, I won't go into all of that, studying and teaching. I love it, but the Supreme Court has right now shown itself to be territory of the fascistic force. They have shown it in how they have abetted the criminal in terms of the January 6th set of crimes by giving him months of delay for no good reason, but just manifesting their being on the side of the criminal. But it's also shown in a different way, and not so much purely partisan and corruptly siding with the wrong side against the rule of law. But with the Dobbs decision, you hear the voice through Alito of the spirit of fascism. He would have fit into some panel of the Inquisition that condemned people to be burned at the stake. You just sort of feel it in his language and his ways of doing it. Really didn't care about the well-being of the vulnerable women whose lives he was overturning, disrupting. I don't know if he understood what he was unleashing exactly. Send it back to the states. No, see, one of the things that fascism has been doing for a long time on both abortion and gun rights is taking positions that guarantee that the American people will be embattled on these issues. And I advertise myself as somebody who's studied the forces at work in the human world, but it is the real force that's taking over America doesn't give a damn about gay marriage, doesn't give a damn about abortion. It is useful to use those issues to distract tens of millions of Americans away from where the real action is, which is this force is taking power and wealth away from average Americans in our democracy and in our capitalistic system, and handing that power and handing that wealth to the people who are already the mightiest and richest in the country. That's where the real action is. But abortion is a very useful political issue. They have spent half a century teaching tens of millions of people that if you want to be a good Christian in your politics, fight on this issue. If you actually read the various Gospels and you see what Jesus taught, it's really hard to believe that if Jesus were to look at the dynamics growing out of this party that's made abortion and gun rights such central issues, if he actually perceived what was going on in the country, I think we know that he would not allow himself to be distracted by abortion and gay rights, and he would talk about the widows and the orphans and the people who are being exploited and by the high and the mighty. I mean, that's what the prophets always did. They looked especially at the sins of the powerful and the rich. Trying to think of whether how much of what Jesus said actually points in that direction. He says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." He had a reluctance to get as involved in the question of the rich giving to the poor. But anyway, here we are in an America where I've been watching for 30 years how a force has been rising on the political right. I didn't recognize it except with Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, and then Fox News added in as the 90s went along. I saw something that was happening in the arena of propaganda that I thought was really toxic, and I did everything I could to address that. I mean, I never was that impactful, but pieces in the Baltimore Sun and Christian Science Monitor, and especially doing talk radio out here in the Shenandoah Valley. But I didn't understand at that time how big this thing was. How big? I mean, I saw it in terms of toxicity and a deliberate attempt to polarize people, so that we couldn't work together to achieve things that we did agree about. I saw some of that, but it wasn't actually until 2004 that I understood that one of America's two major political parties had become something different from what I had ever seen in America, either in my own experience from Eisenhower on upward, or in my studies of American history, which is a subject which I've taught at the college level. Something new I saw was happening. But even then, I could never have envisioned it going as far as this. So gradually, it is sort of like a camera out of focus, that you see something kind of blurry. It starts off as a kind of a blob, and it gradually gets brought into focus. And lo and behold, you see something which is really grotesque. Something that consistently, in what it says and what it does, is making the world more broken. And across the board. I mean, in terms of inequalities of wealth and power, make things worse. In terms of climate change, make things worse. In terms of relationships between the races, make things worse. In terms of maintaining the integrity of our democratic system, make things worse. Oh, I discovered by looking at that something about the forces at work. When you've got something that is consistently working to make things worse, there's something behind that actor being a political party in this case. There is a nexus of, I mean, it's not just the party, it's also certain like the Koch brothers and Liberty University and all the various things that they represent that feed into the same power. And behind all that, there being a kind of a corporate system, a big element of which has plutocratic ambitions. And you see all these things coming together, and white supremacy. Oh, and you can see this kind of a convention of things that are get in the way of our making the world more whole. And then you look at their attack on democracy, which I could catalog all the ways they've been attacking democracy, from the torture memo all the way up to trying to send fake electors and disenfranchise people. I mean, it's been comprehensive. Steal a Supreme Court seat. And then the sort of the thing that gets my blood pressure going, because my great commitment above all, from being my dad's son, I just can't stand the lie. All the lies, geez. So if you look at all the ways that you could characterize what this once respectable political force had become, let's say political party, because there's a long history of there being elements of this sort. The force of white racism, the force of corporate greed, they've got a long history. But this coalescence into a single unit that's got this coherence of effect on the world, consistently making things more broken. You look at all those different ways and you say, that maps pretty well with what we see in fascism when we look at it in various times and places. I mean, you can start with Mussolini and Hitler, and you can go all the way up to Putin and Bolsonaro and Erdogan and Modi and these various people who violate the rules and set up rules that serve them and make them other than the instrument of the people. Especially Putin these days, he's such a pure case. He and Hitler have so much in common. 1939 invasion of Poland, 2022 invasion of Ukraine. You can see the same set of things that are sort of the spirit of fascism. It does all these things. It launches invasions when they shouldn't be. It consolidates power to make it top down, and it's a lawless power. It seizes upon vulnerable minorities and it persecutes them, and it imposes the religious views of some on everybody. And that's how abortion fits into this wider political battle, where we've got democracy versus fascism. And the idea that we let everybody in America gets to live according to their beliefs. That is a major American value. Versus everybody in America has to live in accordance with the beliefs of this group, which actually turns out to be a minority. Well, it's clear which one is the side of democracy, and it's clear which one is an expression of the fascistic spirit. And I think I'll conclude with that and go on to the next thing. Let's see. Maybe this should be a standalone. I talk about these small level things because I want to connect them. I want to show that I'm not a complete flake making bogus claims, but also because it's an opportunity to go from the concrete that people think about to the somewhat deeper levels where I think we should be looking to see what the nature of the battle is. And so let me take that one down one more level. Because if you look at the set of issues that we look at, what the spirit of the fascism is expressing itself, consistently working to make things more broken. And then if you look at democracy, which is our best effort to allow the most whole aspects of the possibilities of the human world to realize themselves. It's the best we've come up with to meet a very difficult challenge of how to run a civilized society where people can find fulfillment and where things are the way they should be and stuff like that. Democracy is setting things up so that democracy can be seen as a force that consistently works to make things better in the human world, to make things more whole. The best way for the system to evolve such that humankind in general will benefit. The world will become more like it should be, according to the values that we experience. And if you compare these two forces, a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken, like fascism does, and a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more whole, things like freedom of religion and the rule of law, and these various things to try to make a good world. Those two coherent forces are embattled in America today, but they have been embattled in the civilized world for 10,000 years. And those two forces are actually, if you look at them, and I'm not going to go into it, but I've laid it out in 3 or 4 different ways that show the existence of coherent forces of that nature. They are at the center of the human drama. And if you look at things that make things worse and make things better, you've got two coherent forces that act very much like what traditional religions have understood as a battle between good and evil. And there actually is something going on in the human world that I'm really eager to show as many people as I can reach that maps quite well onto the concept of good versus evil. And moreover, I can explain how these two forces inevitably arise as competing forces about shaping the human world, inevitably arise out of seeing our story in an evolutionary perspective that shows that it was a huge deal when our species took an unprecedented, fateful step, becoming the first species in the history of life on Earth, which has gone back 3.5 billion years, to take the step of extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life. That is a point of major discontinuity which unleashes something, which I try to show. It's an inevitable component. It's an inevitable result of a species making that kind of a breakthrough, unprecedented, into a whole new situation. Oh, a situation that inevitably will generate a systemic force. Here we get down to, well, that's what I spent 14 years trying to prove. And I think, I don't think there's any holes in the argument, but go take a look at it, ABetterHumanStory.org, or buy that book, but I've done it briefer since then. Good versus evil. If you're of a secular worldview, and you're like a lot of people I've interacted with over the time, 20 couple years when I've been trying to talk about this, you don't think that that's a legitimate reality to point to. I've encountered that over a lot of years, and I sort of respect it, but I want to say that I have something to offer. I mean, I respect it in that the religious point of view talked about evil in supernatural terms, Satan and his minions and such. And I understand that when you cease to see things in those terms, how are you going to conceptualize? There might be a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. It makes the human world more broken. How are you going to conceptualize that? Well, that's what I've spent a lot of the last 20 years trying to do. And I think I deliver it. And if you'd want to know if there was such a force, please go and see. And there's also an evolutionary way of looking at our human story where we evolved biologically as part of the natural order. And that instilled in us a variety of things that really matter, that don't get the respect and attention that they deserve. But again, this is not violating the secular worldview. It's trying to complete some unfinished business, because the evolutionary perspective doesn't just say, oh, well, we evolved with this planet. It wasn't just a special creation on day number 6, in the book of Genesis. No, there's a secular way of understanding that there's an evolutionary process, that when it takes a particular step, has really big consequences. It really transforms the whole nature of the situation. So I claim, for example, to prove, to my satisfaction in any event, quite sincerely, that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that steps onto the path of civilization, extricating itself from its biologically evolved niche, inventing its own way of life, will plunge itself into a kind of disorder that generates a systemic force that will make inevitable that it's the process of the evolution of its civilization through the generations, through the centuries, through the millennia, will be in certain predictable directions that are not a function of the choice and desires and the nature of the creature, but inevitably arise out of the dynamics of the system. So let me turn to one of the topics that I put out. If you saw that placard that's out there, it was out there. I'll just read it. This one's called Trampling versus Fire Drill. How you can't tell human nature from our collective dynamics. Here's how I'm thinking about this trampling versus fire drill. Sometimes people can be in a situation that's simply out of control. I think that the rise of civilization created that kind of a situation. Civilization has not been under human control to a very meaningful extent. And I sometimes try to estimate what percent of it should be understood as beyond human control. I don't have a clear answer. A significant, that's all I feel able to say. And the out of controlness is the system. It characterizes the system. And people have to behave as best they can in the disordered system. So, for example, I'm not sure if I'm remembering the history of this right. It's been some years since I read about it. There was a fire in New York City. I think it was in a Copacabana nightclub. I could be wrong. The important thing is that the fire broke out and people ran for the exits. You know, you're not supposed to shout fire, and panic is not real good in these situations. And the panic problem was compounded by, if I recall correctly, that the club's doors opened inward. So that if you got a press of people trying to get through the doors, it's not possible to open them because the press keeps on pushing them closed. And I think a grotesque number of people got trampled to death. I think we're talking about in the dozens for sure. One of the consequences, incidentally, if I remember correctly, was that from then on it was mandated that in any such room meeting certain characteristics, the doors would have to open out so that people won't just get smothered and trampled. Okay. Now imagine instead a different kind of situation. I don't know if people still have fire drills like we did when I was in. Well, let's see. Did we have them in high school? I don't remember them in high school, but we had them in elementary school, maybe junior high. And every once in a while, I mean, it wouldn't be very frequent, but we would stand up at our desks and we'd file out in a particular way. And we would go to a particular exit, and we would exit the building and walk to a particular place where we would congregate while the structure that was on fire would not consume us. We also had drills about what to do in case of a nuclear attack, but the other one is the one that suits the Copacabana contrast. The difference between the two situations is that when you've been able to sort of prepare so that there will be an orderliness in the situation, you can get things to unfold in the way that is desirable for things to unfold. However, in the nightclub, when you just got a bunch of people have never been together, and there's no, there are various structural Anyway, there's no way that they're prepared to be able to. Everybody has to deal with a situation in which other people are panicking. The doors won't open, et cetera, et cetera. There's no difference in the nature of the two groups. I mean, forgetting for a moment that those are adults at a nightclub and these are maybe our children. You could have fire drills, maybe in the Pentagon, with only adults filing out in an orderly way in case there's another attack like the plane on 9/11. It's not a matter of children versus adults. It's a matter of having people understand what to do so that there'll be orderliness leading to an optimal result. The rise of civilization is a Copacabana kind of situation. We've got these creatures that are taking an unprecedented step because they've got an unprecedented level of creative intelligence, and they're able to develop culture qualitatively further than, say, chimpanzees or any other creature that you could say has some aspects of culture. They're able to take culture, and their inventive capacity is such that they can transform themselves from living like primate bands, like they evolved, to now living like people who plant crops and herd large numbers of animals rather than hunting them and stuff like that. They're creating something that had never existed. That sounds like a breakthrough into freedom, and in many ways it did. It burst open the range of possible possibilities for a culture. Culture could go all kinds of different directions when there's no limit to the amount of territory you might dominate, no limit to how many people you might end up being able to feed, and stuff like that. You could go in all kinds of directions with all kinds of values and ways of organizing and mythologies and stuff like that. But there's nothing to regulate how these different entities are going to interact. And this is one of the places where the evolutionary perspective should be calling us who have a secular worldview to pay attention to. That the evolutionary perspective is a lot about the creation of overarching order. It isn't just what the Darwinians and the social Darwinians of the late 19th century got us thinking about, of nature red in tooth and claw and competition, the struggle for life. It's all those things. It's a completely opportunistic system. Nobody's running it. But there's a way in which what gets selected for operates at all levels. And a line that I continually trot out in these videos is the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. That's what we came out of. We were in a niche, which, in the midst of all kinds of changes as continents fluctuate around and ice ages come and go. Nonetheless, the living system is continually selecting for what can perpetuate the system, with all these different things getting their DNA into the future because it works for the larger whole too. The overarching order: lions, zebras, grass, predators and prey, evolving together. Their interactions necessarily, as the evolutionary process is selecting what can get its DNA into the future and selecting against what cannot get its DNA into the future, it's always choosing something that's more whole in the sense of it. Even as the wolf falls upon the lamb and tears it to shreds, at the larger level, this is part of the pattern of the survival, not just for the wolves, but for the sheep as well. Because if there are no predators, they become too numerous, they overgraze, it's out of balance, it ceases to be a perpetual motion machine. And evolution has continually been striving, I don't mean to personify, to create a perpetual motion machine. So evolution has been selecting for order. And like in the Copacabana, the emergence of all these civilized societies in various places on the planet, in various little clusters in Nile Valley and Tigris, Euphrates, etc., and then these empires, they're all having to interact with each other, unlike the wolves and the sheep or the lions and the zebras, outside of any order that makes sure that that those interactions are compatible with the overall perpetuation of the system. It is an anarchic situation. Unlike with the primate bands that hunter-gathering peoples essentially were, that have evolved in relationship to all kinds of other things in the system so that they can keep on going in a more or less whole way. The new systems that emerge are going to have to interact with each other with nothing to make sure that the wholeness gets served, that there's going to be harmony or synergy. Nothing like that's there, and there's nothing like the authorities that give us the fire drills to say, okay, well, let's make sure that our system will be well ordered by having these fire drills. Doesn't matter what the nature of the creature is when it takes this fateful step onto the path of civilization. It will inevitably step into a disordered situation that is called anarchy, that will inevitably involve the emergence of a struggle for power, an ongoing war of all against all. The kind of thing I referred to before, that sort of make it mandatory that for countries like Israel and Iran to not take any kind of blow and not return it. You got to show that you're going to be able to defend yourself. Well, this is an artifact of the social evolutionary process that we stumbled into. And the evolutionary process not only shows that there's a real distinction between a system like civilized societies that has not been ordered, has no fire drills, and it's not a reflection of human nature to look at what happened in the Copacabana. Those people were not sort of natural tramplers any more than the people who have been through fire drills and who can make their exit in an orderly way. They're the same things, but in different systems. And that's why I say that the ugliness that we see in human history is not human nature writ large. We aren't by nature tramplers. We just got hoisted by our own petard when our creative intelligence threw us into a situation which inevitably would unleash a destructive force. But then we can look back at the evolutionary perspective and see that the secular worldview that I think is predominant from my interactions with people over the decades doesn't recognize that in powerful and important things that we are evolved to have within us are major resources for us to turn to for guidance and for passion, and that belong on our map of reality, whereas a secular worldview doesn't think that the things that are inside us that bear upon the nature of our experience are real and important. That's merely subjective. Not if evolution has put them in there. It's not merely subjective. Evolution wouldn't have put them in there unless there was something about having them that helped our ancestors to survive. And that has big implications too. The evolutionary perspective says that the ancestors that had these experiential tendencies, I like to call them, were more likely to get their DNA into the future than those that didn't, which means that they necessarily had an impact on how those people, the course those people took, that was conducive to their survival. That means it was life-serving. It means that that thing which is subjective is also a projection of something that works in the objective world. There's a moral dimension that we have built into us. I don't think I want to elaborate on that at the moment, but I certainly have. That guides us toward motivating us to do the things that will help us get our DNA into the future. Life-serving, valuable. The secular worldview has taken a look at the issue of value and say, well, value isn't out there. Well, value couldn't be out there. Value would have to register. Nothing can matter except as it registers in the experience of creatures who experience some things as mattering, some things as better, and some things as worse. Without that, what difference does it make what happens? But as soon as that emerges out of evolution, then things do make a difference. And the secular worldview that doesn't think that the better and worse have any real meaning are not looking at what the evolutionary perspective shows, which is that value is an emergent reality. It gets selected for. So that there's a correspondence between our pursuit of happiness and our getting our DNA into the future. Life versus death and better versus worse experientially are aligned because evolution makes them that way. So in both those respects, I'm trying to show that the secular worldview needs to take the evolutionary perspective that we've had, since Darwin, and as it emerged, and it's still a battle about whether people are going to believe it. I think, I ask myself, what would it take not to understand that evolution is a core set of forces at work in creating the world that we live in? I mean, it would take gymnastics to avoid that understanding because it's such a huge body of knowledge and insight at this point. Not necessarily complete, but it's huge. And it's been part of a large portion, a growing portion of American civilization, for example, for a very long time. But it's not all that long since we've had battles over, biblical versus, creationist versus evolution. But I'm talking to the people who are who see things in evolutionary terms, but as part of a secular worldview, but whose secular worldview has weakened the good guys in today's contest between democracy and fascism, weakened their ability to see what they're up against, weakened their ability to fight against the rise of a destructive force because they don't take seriously some of the things that evolution tells us. Pay attention to this. Pay attention to, as best we can, excavate what's born into us in terms of experiencing things as better and worse. It's not easy to nail it all down, but I think we can get the general gist of it. And then there's another dimension of our experiential tendencies, which is there is part of the human genome. I think it's easy to prove, simply fact, A part of that a big proportion of people are capable of having experiences of a special quality, very impactful, have to do with maybe with experiencing things as not only valuable, but as sacred, and maybe deliver some spiritual truth that is held to be, this happens. It is simply factual. And the fact that we have that capacity, apparently part of the human genome, because we can see it cross-culturally and through history, that tells us something. Again, if that capacity is in there, it's clear evidence that it must have been better for the ancestors who had that capacity or developing that capacity were more likely to have descendants like us than their contemporaries that didn't have that. Selection for what gets the DNA into the future, that's life-serving. It suggests that the people who had those experiences that were very impactful in their lives that people are still having, including me, that the impact of that on their lives made it more likely that down the line there would be descendants. That's a major message. A secular worldview that doesn't honor that experiential capacity, which means to honor the spiritual dimension, is missing something. It's missing the power that comes, obviously, when people get that kind of spiritually transformative experience. People are transformed. I would much rather go to battle against fascism with people who are inspired at that level. I just flashed on a lot of movies I've seen where the Civil War, the Union troops are always accompanied by the battle hymn of the Republic, inspired. Listen to the words of the battle hymn of a Republic, and it's always used to show that there is a force rising here to fight this fight against the slave power. We need that in America today, the battle being between democracy and fascism. And the battle that we're fighting today, by the way, isn't identical with the battle that was fought, I would say, take a look from, let's say, the Mexican War in the 1840s, all the way through to the surrender of Lee at Appomattox. That battle and today's battle don't map perfectly, but there are a lot of parallels. I thought those parallels were very striking back in 2014. I wrote a piece, and I invite you to Google it. My name is Schmuckler, and the name of the piece was "The Force That Drove Us to Civil War Is Back." And I believe it appeared on Huffington Post at that time. And it's on my website, ABetterHumanStory.org. It's gotten a bit muddier. But if you look at the whole process by which the American nation became so polarized that we no longer, by 1859, 60, 61, there are these moving passages about how we're no longer one nation. We're like two different. There's a lot that's very parallel. And also, if you look at sort of the spirit that imbued the conduct of the South from the end of the Mexican War through the 1850s, to the caning of Senator Sumner on the Senate floor, bloody Kansas. If you look and then you look at something rising in the Union, there are a lot of parallels. And they remain there still, but we are now in a situation where we've got such a powerful force embodied in a single person. And though this single person parallels some of the racism and some of the greed that characterizes the rest of the political force that he is dominating, and which was also characteristic of what was unfolding in America leading up and through the Civil War. He's got his own unique dynamic, and I don't feel able to say anything very illuminating, but it's muddied the waters. But in 2014, I wrote that piece, and I think it works still pretty much. That's one of the ways you can see that a coherent force. There's something you can see that moves through the culture, through the generations. When you look at how causes and effects, you can see that the spirit of the Confederacy emerged as an ally of the thing that was taking over the Republican Party from the rise of Limbaugh and Gingrich and Fox News. Not identical, but great overlap. Well, let's talk about that figure that, going back and forth between levels. Let's talk about Donald Trump, at least a little bit. There's no shortage of stuff about Donald Trump in my past videos, but today is the day that the news people are trumpeting as this unprecedented thing, a former president of the United States being tried. I don't think that that captures really what's unprecedented about this. I mean, if Ford hadn't pardoned Nixon, we would have had another trial, but it wouldn't have been like this. Tricky Dick may have been a crook after all, but he would have behaved himself like a defendant is supposed to behave himself. Not this fellow. This guy has launched a major war against the forces of law that are trying to hold him accountable. And it's really been something to behold, depressing to behold how successful he's been. I mean, his one-loss record, I don't know exactly how it balances. Yeah, he's got that huge judgment against him from the civil trial. No small thing. We'll see what happens with this bond that he claims to prove. I gather that bond won't stand up, and then what happens? I don't know. But he's lost some. And this trial is about to begin. And I'm willing to put, a big packet of money down on he's going to be convicted. The only alternative, actually, I think, will be that there will be some one or two jurors who practice jury nullification, and we end up with a hung jury. I wish we could rule that out, but we've seen juries and people who have a lifetime of working with juries seem to be confident that the American jury can be paneled, that will deliver justice. And I remember there was a woman who voted to convict Paul Manafort, and she had a MAGA hat. She was definitely on the Trump side of things, but she was an honest juror, and she spoke about it was just her duty to convict Manafort because he was proven beyond a reasonable doubt to be guilty. I think that's going to happen. But I am a little bit concerned about everybody recognizes that we're dealing with the rule of law versus Trump. And the battle in the courtroom is certainly a major dimension of that battle. But everybody knows that isn't the only dimension of that battle, that there's a political thing going on too. That Trump has got no legal defenses for any of these cases as far as anybody has been able to discern. I mean, is he guilty in the documents case? I don't see any room for doubt. Is he guilty in the January 6th case? I don't think there's any room for doubt. Is he guilty in this cheating case? I think it's going to be shown. Is he guilty of the RICO charges? If that's going to be shown too, if we can get to trial. He obviously doesn't want the facts to come out. That's why he tries to delay everything. Not the way an innocent man behaves. I don't know what the win-loss record is, but it seems like his political strategy is working reasonably well, that he's got his supporters believing it's a witch hunt and he's being persecuted, when it's just so obviously not the case. So what happens in the courts, everybody often stresses, in the court, there are rules of evidence, there's the facts, and there's the law, and I think that that's wonderful. I mean, I really think it's wonderful. In the court, you can't get away with all the stuff that Donald Trump does all the time, which is showing absolutely no respect for the facts or the truth. I mean, he's just an incredible phenomenon. I think if there's somebody who's looking at a gallery of history's biggest liars, he is far and away the biggest. If the only battle were in the courtroom, I would say, this is looking really good, because I think that the DA, what's his name, Adams, he's gonna win. He's gonna get the conviction. And then the question, what kind of sentence should he get? But there'll be appeals for a long time. But still, the American public will be exposed to some stuff. And I'm interested in knowing if it's a nothing burger because it's old, like some people say, or no, people are going to see a lot of stuff that's going to be very impactful. I'll be interested to see. But he's going to come out of the court, if his past history is any indication, and he's going to speak to the press. He's going to put out a statement into the political dimension. He has no legal defense, because all these prosecutors have got the goods on him. So what he's got is a lot of Americans who can be influenced by his fact-free presentation, full of false accusations and ugly stuff that he can put out when he steps out of the courtroom in front of a bunch of microphones. That's his right. I mean, there are gag orders in place. That's a whole nother issue. But none of these gag orders will prohibit him from going out there and saying he's a poor victim of a political witch hunt and that these are terrible people. And so I don't like the idea that that dimension of that arena of the battle be forfeited. And I don't know that it's necessary that it be forfeited. Now, I recognize, well, I think I recognize that there's a norm that the prosecutor speaks in filings. He speaks through the court process. I think that people would say it would not be appropriate for Alvin Bragg. Adams was the mayor. I'm sorry. Alvin Bragg to come out to the microphone and refute what Donald Trump just said. I'm not sure that would be wrong. I mean, there is the rules that reign in court, and then there are the rules that reign out on the public microphones. Is it necessary that the prosecutor speak only in the court and forfeit to the defendant to speak propaganda and lies and manipulativeness and throw the American people, or many as he can get, away from seeing the truth that's being exposed in the court of law? Well, I'm not sure. If there isn't, I would invite the prosecutors to consider playing that role. Alvin Bragg seems to have a nature that's not quite suited to that kind of a toe to toe. That's not a criticism. I think he seems like he's fine, but I'm not sure he would be the best one to go. There are different ways of doing things. You could even have Barack Obama go up there because he used to have a really good jab, but he's got this history of not being really up for the fight nearly enough. I think Jack Smith, and if we ever get to that trial, I think he would be good to do that. But if that's not okay for a prosecutor to do, if the prosecutor's got his, public microphone hands tied behind his back, then I think we should find a way to get a designated, there must be a good word, designated voice of the truth, counterfactual voice, somebody who would have some stature. So it's not just, I don't know. Could you go with like Andrew Weissman? He's perfectly capable in a lawyerly way of prosecuting the case. But again, he's sort of tied a lot to the legal norms, which are not formed around having a trial of somebody like Donald Trump, who's waging an all-out war at every point in every way against the rule of law. Not the well-behaved Richard Nixon we would have had in 1975 facing the charges that got him kicked out of the presidency. No, we got a different kind of guy, and we need to be able to adapt our system to take into account that difference. And I don't think it's okay for Donald Trump to have nothing contradicting him right there and then when he says a whole bunch of crap to the American people and sends tens of millions off the hunt. When the business of America right now is to get as many Americans as possible to understand just what the nature of the choices we face in the 2024 election. That is the business of America right now. There's a lot of places where democracy versus fascism is getting fought out. But this election is the main short-term event. Donald Trump getting elected president would be a setback of enormous magnitude, maybe the end of maybe decisive for fascism. Listening to the things he says he wants to do and the plans that the Heritage Foundation and other people are creating for him. If we picture an America that's being run that way, it's a different America. So his not getting elected it is where the rubber really hits the road. I mean, getting him convicted of his crimes to establish that in America, nobody is above the law. That is really big. And people have been wondering. I mean, this is a drama that's being acted out in front of the American people. The American people are witnessing the question being answered. Is everybody under the law in America? If Merrick Garland had been doing his job as he should have been doing, he would have realized at the very beginning of his tenure that he had to take this battle on with Donald Trump in order to establish, no, if a guy commits the most serious crimes in American history right in front of the whole country with trying to overturn an election, question of whether we have the rule of law and nobody is above the rule of law is already on the table and needs to be tackled right away. But he was afraid. That points in a whole other direction that I am happy to address now and then, which is what has been wrong with the democracy side of this battle, that this fascistic force has been able to rise to such power that we really don't know for sure what kind of America we're going to have in a few years. people born when I was born in 1946 had no reason to think that that would ever be at stake at this level. So we don't want to leave the political dimension to be indirectly affected only by the facts and the truth that are established in the courtroom. We know already that a lot of things can be established as true beyond any reasonable doubt, like the January 6th committee. Any American paying attention with average intelligence and in a rational state of mind should have known by the time the January 6th committee finished its work that Donald Trump represents a totally lawless force, a fascistic force, and needs to be held accountable for committing serious crimes. But we know that that truth hasn't pervaded the American body politic enough. There's a chance that a lot of Americans who wouldn't choose fascism will help fascism come to power by voting for Donald Trump in November. So if we're interested in upholding the rule of law, it isn't enough to run a good trial. Not when the force of fascism is going to come out in an embodied form and attack the rule of law with lies, unanswered by the forces of rule of law. So who could do it? Well, if it were in Washington, I might nominate Jamie Raskin to be the voice of democracy. Maybe he could do it from Washington. Maybe it doesn't have to be in front of the very same group. Maybe there's a way of piping it in from Washington. You know, maybe he could take on that assignment of listening to what Trump says when he comes out of the courtroom, where he's never going to testify. He doesn't want to hand the forces of law the chance to nail him for perjury, and he can't tell the truth. I mean, everybody's been predicting he will not testify, and I think that's true. But he's going to come out and he's going to try to deceive as many people as he can in ways that serve his political purposes. And I'd like to have somebody either at the same place in the same courtroom. Ideally, I think that would probably be better, because the same press would be there, the same TV cameras would be there. And you could jump right in and say that's all a bunch of lies. Here's why he's being tried for this. This isn't just about some old thing. This is about a guy who's a cheat. Not only is it cheat here where he tried to cheat the American people of knowing what's true, he's been trying to cheat the American people of knowing what's true by delaying all his trials so that the truth of the matter will not be exposed about his other crimes. And here he is out here trying to muddy the waters when we show that he cheated in 2016 too by trying to bury the truth so that the American people wouldn't know what Stormy Daniels and what's her name, you know who I mean, the Playboy Bunny, might otherwise have told them in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape. That might have been the difference between victory and defeat. He won because he kept those things silent and he broke laws to do it. And he cheated the American people out of information that they were entitled to. And he's still doing that. So let's not kid ourselves. We're dealing here with a liar and a cheat. And his lies and his war against the truth and his war against the law cannot be abided. Don't be deceived by this witch hunt nonsense. I'm not sure if that's the right way to deliver the speech, but you want people to have that running in their heads when they think about what Donald Trump just said and when they go into the voting booth. So it's a problem if there's really an asymmetry between the defense that can talk about anything anywhere, gag rules aside, which isn't a big aside, but and the prosecution that speaks only through filings and in court and such. If there really has to be that division, then I think it's the forces of democracy need to summon up an actor or even a group of actors, a small group of well-respected, articulate, eloquent constitutional authorities who can take whatever it is that Donald Trump tries to inject into the body politic and counteract it with the antidote of the truth. Well, there's more to be said, and I'm going to be back here in just a few minutes to keep going, but I do want to take a little break. Maybe give me 5 minutes. I'll be back, and a couple of things on the schedule that I put out, things I was thinking about. How Biden, on the small picture, how Biden can diffuse the age issue. I think I got a good idea. I'll share it when I come back. And then back to the bigger level. Why inevitably the evolution of civilization will find an ugly spirit to elevate, regardless of the nature of the civilization creating creature, to have a disproportionate say in how that creature's civilization will evolve. It's inevitable. And when you see that inevitability, it has huge implications for how we understand what kind of creatures we are, why our history looks the way it looks, and what the challenges are that we need to face if humankind is going to survive on this planet for the long haul, rather than destroy ourselves, which we could do in a variety of ways, I'm at least including a nuclear holocaust. And we can see evidence in the world now that we have not escaped from that danger. And an environmental catastrophe so big that we bring the biosphere down on our own heads. And we can't rule that out either, based on the thing we can already see gathering momentum still. The better off we will be to understand the nature of the battle and how it is a function of what our species uniquely has done in a mere 10,000 years as an outgrowth of an evolutionary process that was biological, that unfolded for 3.5+ billion years before we effected a major discontinuity in the whole process, which turns out to be rather dangerous and rather painful for the creature who's stumbled into this thing. So I hope that you'll stick around. I'm going to put up the placard that preceded this show, and you'll see some of what we've already discussed, and you'll see a little bit of what we will discuss. And I'll be back within 5 minutes. Thank you for sticking around. Bye-bye. Hello again. Uh, I want to talk about a couple of topics I said before. Before I get to them, I want to talk about the matter of repetition, which is one I struggle with. But there are a couple good reasons why I stress certain points repeatedly. First of all, they're really major points. My mission is to get as many people as possible to absorb as much as possible of the better human story, the integrative vision that I've put together, so that when I shuffle off this mortal coil, uh, certain understanding is not going to shuffle off with me, but it'll be out there with people seeing the world through that prism, which I think really could have a beneficial impact. Uh, I really do. I mean, it's embarrassing to say, but I've committed myself not to hold back about such beliefs. There are a couple of reasons. One is I'm aware that we're in this medium. It's not like I've got a class that meets every Monday and Thursday morning at 11, and week after week I can assume that everybody who's hearing me today was also here the previous time. And so I call it my Drew Barrymore problem, as I try to figure out how to play this hand out to achieve my mission, which is a real long shot, but still, it's what I got to do. And if you know the movie 50 First Dates, Adam Sandler's got has fallen in love with the Drew Barrymore character, and she's had an accident before he met her, which has the effect that it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, but in a different sense, that she doesn't remember anything that happened. She wakes up every morning not remembering the day before. Um, uh, and he has to get her to fall in love with him all over again. He just starts, and that's I feel like I'm Adam Sandler. New people here are Drew Barrymore, and I've got to talk to the people who have not heard any of the other stuff that I've laid out. And now over 100 and some, I don't know how many videos where I've been. We're doing my very best to show this integrative vision in a whole variety of ways. But they're Drew Barrymore, and it's a brand new day. So there's repetition that comes in from that. And um, then the challenge is I really value the people who are coming back. And there are some of those too that have heard the other things. And how do I talk in a way that is okay for Drew Barrymore, and but also won't be boring for the people who remember our first date and our second date and things like that. And in that respect, I want to say this: two things. One is, I know from experience that the mastery of some of these ideas is doesn't happen just like that. The first time I ever tested that publicly was in 1973. I delivered a talk about the parable of the tribes idea. That book didn't exist yet. I was working on my doctoral dissertation, which went to 1,600 pages. I boiled it down to presenting it as a lecture to the college in this big auditorium, Prescott College in Arizona. I was on the faculty. I presented that, and all the students then had the assignment. I don't think I was the one who originated. It's not the kind of thing I would have. Well, I don't remember. It was a while ago, 51 years. To write up, what is it you understood? What did Dr. Schmuckler? I wasn't Dr. Schmuckler then. Okay. What did Schmuckler say? or Andy. I don't remember I think in that faculty we were on a first name basis. Pretty groovy school at the time. I think it probably still is. Anyway, so I then got all these papers. I think people were supposed to write it right there and then, if I remember correctly. And I was supposed to grade it. And it was sobering. I saw that some people had gotten it, but it wasn't as much as I would have assumed. In the process of presenting the main idea, like in what ended up in the first, I put out the common sense view of social evolution. Why do things change in the directions they change? What determines whether some cultural option will be adopted or not? And I put forward the common sense view. Oh, people adopt what they adopt because that's what they want. It's an improvement. It's like the way a great cuisine develops. I set that up as a straw man, because then I come in with my own theory, with a parable of the tribes, which shows that no, when you take that step onto the path of civilization, you unleash a selective force that's determined by the structure of the system. I was talking last time about the Copacabana and the trampling, and not by the nature of the creature or the choice of the creature. But I got a bunch of students who thought that I was presenting my straw man as my thesis. Well, okay. So anyway, that was 51 years ago. I've had a lot of other experience of people struggling, well, or not struggling, just I've been thinking in these terms since a moment in 1970 when, wow, and other people haven't been thinking in those terms. And it turns out that I underestimated the amount of mental furniture that needed to be moved around in order to look through the lens I'm presenting. I'll tell you one more story. This is 1987, I think. I was, because of the parable of the tribes, it caught the interest of a remarkable man at the State Department back then. I was part of a group that was trying to help end the Cold War peacefully. That's a many-dimensional task. Involved track 2 diplomacy and stuff like that. Anyway, one of the guys in that group was a brilliant Harvard psychiatrist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author, very smart guy, very nice guy. And I was very fond of him, and we got to be friends, I remember. And we had a conversation after one of our meetings of our group on the West Coast. I can't remember, but my wife, April, and I were at his home in Brookline, Massachusetts. And he and I were in his study and had a conversation. He had read The Parable of the Tribes, which was my attempt to be as compelling and clear as possible. And he was a psychiatrist. And when we were talking about this issue of the parable of the tribes and what it explains, I heard to my amazement that he was still looking at everything in psychological terms. As a psychiatrist, it's sort of a habit of thought. I was talking about something that was systemic. One of the lines that I repeat again and again is, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That line doesn't appear in that book. That book came out in '84, second edition from SUNY Press. That's the University of California Press version. Very, very nicely produced. But the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large, is part of my new effort of recent years to put out something You know, I want somebody, if somebody would like to know if that was true, and I thought that that would get people wanting it to be true, and it is true, because I think that there's a pain that a lot of us feel looking around the human world and looking at what our species looks like. Yuck. I mean, I've said lately, for example, that three of the four most impactful people on the planet right now are fascistic sociopaths. Putin's one of them. I'll just stick with that for the moment. 3 out of 4, that's not human nature writ large. I think we feel pain about it. So I've used that line. I say, you can look on my website, A Better Human Story, put in ugliness in the search box. You'll get the essay. It's the essay you should start with. I say it's a Carney Barker's way of trying to bring people into the tent. You know, there are people who want me to be able to express things so that they get it. People get it really quickly. Well, it's a little more complicated than it can be done with that. I've been trying to get it so that you can get it quickly. But, you know, the Carney Barker's got to get you into the tent. And then if you read that piece, you can see that once you're in the tent, I get a chance to show you that really is true. I think the logic has no holes in it. So that's what I do with that. It's not easy. Even this Pulitzer Prize winning, brilliant Harvard psychiatrist was having trouble absorbing into his sort of psychologically reductionist way of regarding the human world, in which you can do a lot of really fine work, and he did, to get into the idea that there are forces that can be systemic in nature and not a reflection of the creature's nature. It's not psychological. I talk about the spirit of the gangster. And I say that the spirit of the gangster, inevitably, because of this systemic force, gets a disproportionate say in how civilization will develop. That spirit of the gangster is about selection. The systemic force has got to do with the anarchy that pertains among the civilized society. There's no order to make sure, and I've got a whole variety of ways of showing the implications of there not being an order to regulate it. And one of them is there's going to be selection for certain kinds of things. Among all the possible, apparently possible ways human culture might develop, only those that can prevail in a war of all against all actually can survive and spread, because the other ones get eliminated. And I won't go into, sort of the proofs here and now. I'm just saying, to think systemically is challenging for people. There's the immediate and concrete. What do we see when we look out there? We see people going about their business. But then that whole thing about trampling versus following a fire drill. The same group in two different situations behaves entirely differently. The system, and a disordered system, like in the Copacabana, I think I'm getting that name right. A disordered system leads to a brokenness as a result. And civilization inevitably emerged into a broken system, disordered system, that generated a process of the spread of brokenness through the human world, a war of all against all, a selection for only certain kinds of cultural options that are not the ones that are best for human beings or for any other civilization creating creature, wherever that may happen. They won't have chosen either, because it inevitably emerges that there's a selection that is driven by the anarchic nature of the system. So the topic I was going to deal with when I came back, and then I'll turn to how Biden can defuse the age issue, to come back from the big picture through the more immediate picture of American democracy versus fascism, to the necessity that Joe Biden win this election if we believe in American democracy, which I certainly do. And then to the particular piece of the battle that's got to do with the inescapable reality that Joe Biden is pretty old. And that seems like it creates a vulnerability. And if there's something we can do about that vulnerability to close it off some, well, with the stakes that we got, democracy versus fascism, we ought to do what we can do. Okay, so I say, why inevitably the evolution of civilization will find an ugly spirit to elevate, regardless of the nature of the civilization creating creature. The spirit of the gangster. That's what can prevail in a war of all against all. We can see it in history. We can see it in Lebanon and Somalia. It's within my memory. When there was anarchy, warlords rose to the top. I mean, they're basically gangsters. And that's what happened in the Dark Ages in Europe, when the Roman Empire collapsed and there was disorder. You get these marauding bands, and out of these marauding bands there grow, eventually this feudal structure where these gangsters and then their descendants who become aristocrats get a disproportionate say in how the civilized world, the human world, will be. We can see it. And we can see it back in ancient history. In all the places where civilization emerged rather than being transplanted, but emerged in pristine form, we see similar kinds of gangsterisms of empires and emperors and pharaohs that dominate the mass of people in very exploitive, top-down kinds of ways, very ugly. A lot of slavery, a lot of war. They're the people who rise to the top. And they don't rise to the top because we're all a bunch of gangsters. It's because of the systemic dynamic that what's going to prevail in a war of all against all? Well, we know. We can look at various places when there's not an order to prevent it. Gangsters rise to the top, and they get a disproportionate say in setting up the world. They get pyramids built for their tombs. Anybody think that that's the optimal way of making use of human nature with the greater good in mind, with the total picture of what's best in mind? No. But that's what happens when you step across the threshold into civilization, inventing your own way of life, but plunging into a disordered situation because it's unprecedented. It takes time to create to evolve an order. 3.5 billion years before we took that step. And as I said, it's important, if you want to have an evolution in your secular worldview, to look at what evolution actually creates. It's not just competitiveness. All that takes place within a larger order. And if you step outside that order, there's a problem. And we've been dealing with that problem, and we're still dealing with that problem. And it's not clear yet that human civilization is going to survive on this planet for the long haul because we haven't brought that systemic force under control. We still live in a world in which the spirit of the gangster is getting a way disproportionate say. I mean, imagine what would happen if Russia was not, in this era, having its path dictated almost single-handedly by a gangster like Putin. And what would be the situation in the world today if over the last 15 years the least gangster-like or an ungangster-like spirit had been governing Israel in its relationship with the Palestinians. But especially if there hadn't been a regime like this one in power to deal with the October 7th atrocities committed by Hamas, how much more whole might the world be? And imagine what we could accomplish in terms of moving America forward if instead of what we now have as one of our two major political parties, one which is willing to help Putin, which deals in lies all the time, which has no vision for a better America, has a platform in 2020 which basically said whatever this guy says. I mean, it's really something what we got. Imagine what it would be like if all you have to imagine is it was as constructive and decent a political party as it was under Eisenhower, or if that's too high of a bar, under Reagan and the first Bush. You know, civilization has been shaped by the spirit of the gangster way too much. And that was inevitable. There's inevitable going to be a couple of forces battling it out. And with respect to that force that's a selective force, here's the deal. Any creature that creates civilization is going to be a cultural animal. A lot of plasticity, a lot of different things it could become. So it is going to bring forth into the arena where power is uncontrolled, a war of all against all, a wide range of cultural and human possibilities. It's just inherent in being cultural animals that you're born able to be shaped in a whole lot of ways. And out of that plasticity, if you're going to get like 1,000 different cultural options sort of early on, all these clusters of societies and these different regions, different cultural, some of them are going to be very this way and some of them are going to be very that way. And if being very that way gives you an advantage in the struggle for power, it's going to characterize the future of that creature's civilization to a disproportionate degree. There are going to be all kinds of ways that the creature could be, from the most beautiful to the most ugly. And it isn't necessarily the ugliest that get chosen by the selection for the ways of power. But the spirit of the gangster is very ugly, and it will get a disproportionate say. So we're living in a planet where three of the four people on this planet having the biggest impact are in that position because of a lot of brokenness that's been working out there in the human world. Brokenness brought the warlords of Somalia into control. Take a look at the beginning of the movie Captain Phillips about the gangsterism of Somalia when the regime collapsed. Anarchy enthroned the leaders of marauding bands to control the landscape of Europe when there was no Roman Empire to impose that order. So there are a lot of different pieces in this integrative vision. And one of the things that I do in terms of repetition, my ambition would be that there are a lot of ways of looking at this integrated whole. I deal with them systematically in my writings at ABetterHumanStory.org, which leads you bit by bit by bit. That takes a while. That one piece about the ugliness That's only 2,000 words. It's kind of a bite-sized thing, but there's a lot to put together. And what I'm trying to do in this genre, by repeating myself, that I'm hoping is working for the people who are not Drew Barrymores, but have been trying to take in what it is I'm trying to convey about this better human story with its multiple dimensions and its important ramifications, is that I can come at things from a lot of different angles to show the interconnectedness in new ways all the time and within a finite space, within a particular live stream, to suggest the integration that takes place at all these levels, and that suggests how these forces work to shape the human world we're in, the forces that we need to gain control of, and the forces that we need to tap into more completely so that the good side beats the bad side in shaping our human world, and we don't destroy ourselves in the next not so many generations. All right. I'm just going to conclude with this topic about how Biden might diffuse the age issue. My premise for this is that the truth about the matter favors Biden when it comes to who's in shape to serve as president from 2025, the beginning of 2025 to the beginning of 2029. Between these two kind of old men. By the way, I think 4 months older than Trump, but we're born the same year. It's funny that my year has given us so many presidents, but I'm not very proud of it all. Clinton was the best of the bunch, but he let us down. There is that issue of who is in better shape, and I believe that the truth is that Biden is actually in better shape. Despite his being older, born in 43, is it? 42? Trump born in 46. And despite the fact that, troublingly, Trump radiates a certain more animal strength than Biden. When I see Biden move, I wish that he had a way of moving that made you feel like he could box out under the boards and get a rebound. It doesn't look that way to me. But that's where he's at. And even though we want our heroes and our presidents to have that kind of physicality, that's not really what we need in a president. FDR did have that physicality in a way, even though he was in a wheelchair. There was a robustness about Roosevelt. It wasn't age that killed him, I don't think. I've got a friend who's worked with the medical history in the Navy, and he believes it was cancer that killed FDR, and that the stroke that he suffered down in Georgia. But anyway, he was a very sick man when he got reelected the fourth time. But he was in a wheelchair from the early 20s into his presidency, and he was a man with great upper body strength. But the presidency isn't about being able to lift bench press however many pounds. It requires other things, and I think, though I'm a little concerned about how Biden's been thinking about how to handle Netanyahu, I don't quite understand the choices he's made. I don't know what the advice is he gets. There may be things I don't see that are important to take into account. But anyway, for the most part, I think he does a really good job of running an administration. And that's what you want in a president. So I think that if that Trump is cognitively and physically a less favorable picture would emerge as the truth. And Trump doesn't release the truth. I mean, this time he's got somebody who's attached to his golf course in West, whatever that Minster thing is in New Jersey. It's a little bit better than Ronnie Jackson and that other doctor back in New York. I mean, these ridiculous things that get put out. But this one is not, doesn't say he's going to live for 500 years. And it doesn't say he's the most healthy person ever to occupy the presidency. I mean, what about Teddy Roosevelt in his 40s? It's not ridiculous, but it's also not to be trusted, has no real information. So if I were Biden, and if my premise is true that he'll win a contest of true medical reporting, or at least tie, I mean, even if he ties, that would be helpful because the age issue cuts against Biden more than it does Trump, the polls indicate. I would issue a challenge, very public challenge, a real laying out the gauntlet, the kind of slap across the face, the kind of thing that you see guys doing, calling somebody out on the street for a gunfight or whatever the deal is, a challenge of honor or whatever, a duel. I, Joe Biden, challenge you, Donald Trump, to go with me to one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the country. You can choose. It can be Johns Hopkins. It can be the Cleveland Clinic. It could be the Mayo Clinic. The best that we got. Authorizing them to check us over from top to bottom, physical, cognitive, and give a report that tells the American people exactly what the findings are that are relevant to our ability to fulfill our responsibilities as president for the next 4 years. And we agree that these reports will be made public automatically right away. That's my idea. I think it's a win-win for Biden. First of all, my guess is that Trump would refuse the challenge, just like he won't testify. He's got this, facts are kryptonite to him. He wants to have control over the whole truth, and he'll paint false pictures at will. A true picture of him? No, I don't think so. Even if he thinks he would win, I'm not sure if he would consent. But if he refuses it, it's a win for Biden. This guy's got something to hide. I make my thing public, but he won't. Now, why do you suppose that is? And here are some evidence that suggests that, I may be a few years older, but I'm a better bet than he. And he knows it. Okay. Or he accepts the challenge. And that's where my premise comes in, because if Biden's going to submit to such a thing, he ought not do that politically if the report's going to be sort of disqualifying. But I don't think it would be, and that's why the premise. If he accepts it, and it's right that he's at least in as good shape as Trump, that helps to diffuse it if it's equal, because maybe it would equalize the impact of the age issue on the electorate. And if he comes out better, even better. If Trump does accept it, and if the report says, this guy's got some age-related declines that he cannot really pass a basic test to indicate that he's thinking straight. I don't know if that's what it would show. I mean, he often seems off the wall and stupid, and he often seems devilishly clever. And I've never been able to figure out how he's able to put together those things. But some agreed upon battery of tests. I mean, that might be part of the challenge. These are the tests that I challenge you to undertake, and I will undertake them too, and we'll make the results public. So that's my idea about how Biden can take this age issue head on and make it a winner for himself, or at least diffuse it. So thank you for paying attention to however much of this you've paid attention to. There is an amazingly integrated, coherent picture of all the stuff that's going on in America and at the level of the planet and through human history that can clarify and illuminate some important things about what we need to do and about who we are as creatures. There's a lot of ugliness out there in the world right now, but that is not who we are. That's what happens to a creature that takes an unprecedented step and unleashes an unanticipated social evolutionary force that gives the spirit of the gangster way too much say in how the human world will be shaped. Well, thank you. Not sure if I'm going to be back to talk about other things. I've enjoyed talking with you about this. I encourage you to subscribe if you're interested in not being a Drew Barrymore. That's my mission is to find people who will remember the date we had last time, because I think ultimately the mission is, can we reach an understanding that gives us a better handle on how we can win this battle of life versus death that inevitably gets unleashed when a creature breaks out of the biologically evolved order and plunges into an anarchy that eventually has to be overcome before the creature destroys itself and its civilization, which we're in danger of doing. So that's why this mission is important. I feel like, I'm not going to give myself any rest. And I hope you'll check out what I've written about all this on ABetterHumanStory.org, which is the fruit of more than a half century's work to build this multidimensional integrated picture. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.